begin, I would like you to take your seats.
We'll start off with item number 1, le procès-verbal de la réunion précédente.
The business arising from previous meeting of May 18th. Is everything okay? Any changes?
No? Okay. We'll proceed on to item 2, business arising from previous meetings. I see nothing. We'll continue. Item number 3, CPA conference surplus utilization. L'intervenant sera Monsieur Dant.
The presenter will Mr. D'Entremont, co-chair, Joint Interparliamentary Council, and Jeremy Leblanc, clerk assistant and director general, International and Interparliamentary Affairs. Mr. D'Entremont.
The microphone.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, I'm pleased to present this request on behalf of the Joint Interparliamentary Council, which I have the honor of co-chairing.
2022, the Canadian region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association hosted an international conference in Halifax, and funding for the conference was provided for by the House of Commons and the Senate, as well as the provinces and territories, in the form of a contribution to the Canadian region. After settling all the expenses related to the conference, a surplus of approximately $340,000 remains, of which half is the federal share. Since the funds were provided as a contribution, any surplus that was left over did not immediately lapse at the end of the year. As a portion of the overall funding was not needed for the purpose for which it was approved in the 2022-2023 by the board and CIBA, these bodies could request that the federal share of the unused funds be returned using the usual formula, 70% House of Commons, 30% Senate. If returned, these funds would not be available to be spent in 2023-24, given that they are associated with an expense in a previous fiscal year. Le CIM recommande tout.
The GIC, however, is recommended that the board and CIBA approve an approach that would allow the surplus funds to be used as a credit toward the annual contribution of the federal branch to the Canadian region of the CPA, and to use the savings generated to finance other association activities.
Annual contribution for the coming years, the surplus conference funds could cover contributions for the next 2 fiscal years and a portion of the contribution in 2025 and 2026. The savings are generated by using the surplus funds as a credit for the annual contribution over the next 3 fiscal years would remain in the JIC envelope and therefore be available to finance other association activities. This would represent approximately $70,000 or $75,000 each of 2023-24 and 24-25, and approximately $20,000 in 2020 or 25-26. And as we know, our budget is very constrained at most times, and a lot of associations are having trouble meeting the requests that are coming to them. I'd be happy to respond to any questions that you might have on this issue.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? Tout est clair?
Everything's clear? Okay.
For the presentations, do we have consent around the table to approve the budget carry forward for fiscal 2023-24? Mr. Scheer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I understand that a lot of these associations have robust activities that allow parliamentarians to meet with others from around the world or within Canada that have similar institutions. And having been speaker and actually chair of the JIC myself, I certainly can appreciate some of the benefits that come from that. But I think we are in an era where we really do have to tackle the cost of living crisis that is fueled by inflationary deficits, and any dollar that we can return back to the Consolidated Revenue Fund is a dollar that will help alleviate that pressure. So I would be in favor of allowing these funds to lapse and be returned to the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
So we don't have a consent. Ms. Finley.
I have a question. Do all branches have to make the same decision, Or could, for example, we decide to return our contribution to the Consolidated Revenue Fund while allowing provincial branches to treat their shares of the surplus as credits if they want to?
Ultimately, that's a decision that could be made by the Canadian Regional Council, which is the body that manages the funds for the Canada region. But I don't see any particular problem. The funds were contributed by each of the 13 branches, and so the region could abide by the decision that particular branches make. So if some wish for it to be returned to them, then it could be returned. If others wish for it to be used as a form of credit for their contributions, that could be done as well.
What I'm getting is we don't have consent to go ahead. Not seeing consent, we'll, oh, Mr. Holland.
Sorry, I apologize because I was working on something as happens. So can we just go over the nature of the concern about the application?
Well, my understanding based on the briefing note is that if we don't approve the recommendation, then the money will just lapse and return to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. And it would probably, when we're looking for places to save money, as your finance minister colleague indicated, government spending is fueling inflation. I think this would be just about the easiest $172,000 we could ever find to help alleviate that pressure.
If I could, I thank for the clarification. So there's 2 points. The first point is I would like Mr. Dutremont to respond about how that money might be used. One of the things I'm concerned with is this was a success story. This is money not being utilized, being returned, and being asked to repurpose, which would offset future costs. And I'm concerned that the message we would send after they diligently work to keep under budget and to underspend what they had is don't do that again, because if you do it, that you're just going to have it taken away, and it would actually encourage overspending is my concern. And so I would just ask what the use of this money would be. And then, the second, I don't want to get into a debate that spills over into the House, but if it's said, I have to take umbrage with it. Canada has the lowest inflation rate, one of the lowest inflation rates in the OECD. We have lower than the G7 average, lower than the G20 average, lower than the United States, lower than the UK, lower than Germany. We're not going to fix global inflation, by cutting services. I just don't think that's. Now, I'm totally on board with making sure that we instill a culture where we use money correctly. I just want to make sure if this money is going to be repurposed and used, I actually think it would send a very positive fiscal message to encourage organizations to underutilize their budgets, and then ask to repurpose that money and allow it to stay in the envelope. It may be able to expand their impact and also encourage the wise and judicious use of their budgets. But I'll ask if I could, Mr. Speaker, for Mr. D'Entremont to be able to respond.
Monsieur D'Entremont.
Yeah, no, so absolutely. So in the $340,000 that was saved from a very successful CPA conference in Halifax, the partners, of course, funded that into its own bank account. So the House of Commons, the Senate, the provinces all put their money into this account, and it's been sitting in that account waiting for all of the bills to sort of finish up. So it finished up $340,000 sitting there. The idea is that we can take our component of that and be able to spend it on CPA dues for the next 3 fiscal years, $75,000, and that'll free up that we can use for other associations, not just the CPA, but other associations within our global $4 million budget, approximately $4 million budget, to be able to maybe allow other associations, as they get close to their amount of funding that's available to them, because we sort of try to give them a certain percentage at the beginning of the year, and then we give them a second percentage at the end of the year to find out exactly how our budget's being spent. So this would give us a little bit more room. It doesn't give us a ton more room, but it gives a little bit more room to allow some associations to travel that they've been having trouble doing over the last the last couple of years anyway, because of the cost of travel at this time.
Okay. Now we'll go to Mr. Scheer, followed by Mr. Julian, then over to Ms. Hoda. Mr. Scheer.
I appreciate my colleagues' comments, and definitely don't want to import political debates from the chamber into this body. So I will resist the temptation to refute some of that. But I will just say that that anything we can do to help deal with inflation, we should be looking for at all aspects of government and parliamentary life. And my understanding is that this was an allotment that the board approved. Rather than thinking that viewing this as a punishment, this was, yes, it was a success story that the event came in under budget. And I think maybe what we can do is we can write a congratulatory letter from the board to those involved in planning and organizing the committee, maybe even a certificate of appreciation to show that we all appreciate the good work and encourage them to bring that kind of fiscal rigor to future events that the CPA and other associations might host. And this will not affect any services provided to Canadians. This is these associations have been managing with the budgets they have for quite some time. And as I said, I think if as members of Parliament and from all different political stripes, when we're looking to be responsible stewards of taxpayers' money, this is the easiest $172,000 that we can ever reallocate back to the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
No comments or questions? Okay, very good. Mr. Julian, followed by Ms. Zahota. Mr. Julian.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. And I feel very strongly, and I've said this before, I'll repeat it. The Board of Internal Economy is where we leave our party affiliation at the door. We don't have partisan debates in here. We have to look at the best interest of the institution. And I've said this many times, I repeat it again, that once we enter that door for this meeting, we are no longer members of any political party or representatives of any particular political affiliation. We are all here as administrators of the House of Commons and our parliamentary democracy. That comment then put aside, I wanted to ask Mr. D'Entremont, what would be the dues for the Commonwealth Parliamentary, the Canadian branch of the CPA over the next 3 years? I believe you were saying $75,000 a year, so it's actually $225,000 over the next 3 years?
Maybe best to let Mr. LeBlanc answer. Yeah, so the formula for the Canadian region has a certain amount based on the size of each legislature, but the federal portion is half of the contribution. So the amount of dues that the federal parliament pays to the CPA Canada region this year would be $75,000. Next year would be approximately $77,000, assuming that there's about a 3% increase year over year. So the amount that's left over in the conference fund would be sufficient to pay the entirety of the dues in the next 2 fiscal years, and then the balance of about $20,000 would pay a portion of the dues in 25-26.
Yeah, so I think the recommendation, what the JIC adopted, which was to simply allow, those are payments we're making anyhow. So I'm a little perplexed about this being a complicated function when we have a surplus that can actually serve to pay what are going to be outstanding accounts that we're going to need to pay anyhow. It just seems to me to be a prudent approach. So I support the recommendation.
Mr. Blanc? Or, oh, Mr. Scheer, I'm sorry.
I just feel like, just to make sure the point is clear from our perspective, if we were going to reduce the association's budget by the amount that we save, then I would agree with my colleague, Mr. Julian. But what I understand is going to happen is that if this recommendation is adopted, the $172,000 will be reallocated through the JIC, however it decides, or to pay these dues. And because the associations will not have to pay those dues, that will free up their budgets to spend on other things. So there will not actually be a savings to the taxpayers, where it'll just be it'll be a little bit of a flow through that will free up spending from some of these other associations. I just want to make that point clear. It's not just that, like, you know, we're going to reallocate these to the associations, and the associations are going to save money and send that back to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. It will actually increase to allow them to spend more, and that's where our reservation is, and that's why I can't support this recommendation.
Okay, I believe Ms. Sahota, followed by Mr. Holland.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Being a member of JIC as well and having had the opportunity to sit through many meetings where it's been really challenging to listen to many of the chairs of different associations that have come before us. They're all coming before JIC to ask for increases, incremental, small increases, not major changes to their budget, but costs have gone up for travel, for so many things like have been mentioned here before. And although I hear Mr. Scheer's point that you want to hold on to that savings, I think eventually we won't be able to hold on to it, and it's better if they have it in their account. So they have to ask us for a little less in the coming time because we will be asked to contribute more. So it gives them some flexibility, and we don't have to be going back and forth. And as my colleague Mr. Holland has said, we know that attitudes might change, or we might find that in the future that associations may try to use all of the money if they think they will be penalized and won't be able to save it for some other use in the future. So I think we should, rather than send them a congratulatory letter, congratulate them by having this savings, and hopefully they can continue to use this savings in a responsible way in the coming years, whether it's for dues or other areas, and we don't have to increase our next ask all that much. The BOIE doesn't have to approve of a very heavily increased ask in the coming days or months.
Mr. Hall, and then over to Mr. Scheer again.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually a very well-studied area.
I'm sorry, Mr. D'Entremont, you wanted to respond to Ms. Sahoda's
Yeah,
comment?
just a quick idea is that we just got a request at the board, and it's going to be discussed at our next meeting. But to give you an idea, is that Canada-NATO, their surplus request, so they can attend a number of different events over the next year, was a request for $150,000. So that's just one request that we have received in recent days. But many of the associations who are looking at their calendars and trying to find ways to have Canadian members of Parliament participate in those, they're well over $100,000, if not more, in their requests for their next year, to be able to meet their calendars going forward. So just to give you an idea of the size of requests that we're actually getting at the JIC, are substantial over the last year or so.
Mr. Holland, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of issues at play here. So let's first talk about.
Il y a certaines questions en jeu ici. Ce que j'entends, c'est qu'il y a une tentative d'être stratégique en réallouant les dollars pour augmenter la portée, l'impact et utiliser, oui.
Is it working now?
Est-ce que ça fonctionne maintenant?
C'est retourné?
Is it working now?
Oui, je peux. Well, yeah, it's better that I speak in English to verify.
Is it back?
No.
We're good? The translation started again? I'm sorry, Mr. Holland, maybe start from the top so that...
So I think we have to, let's start with the first premise, which is, do we agree that the work that is being done is important and should be continued? If the answer is no, then that's a different conversation, and I think we should be direct about that. If we agree that the work that's being done is important, then it's a well-founded principle of management that a use-it-or-lose-it strategy is disastrous. I remember when I was heading Heart and Stroke, having a conversation about, and I won't mention who it was, but there was a prior leader there that had done a use-it-or-lose-it strategy. And what happened, it happened, by the way, in every area that this strategy ever is applied, is it encourages people to spend they get close to the year end of the budget and they say, we got to spend it or we're going to lose it. And it actually encourages spending more and saving less. The strategy that's the most effective is to say, do you believe in the strategic area of business that is being conducted? If you believe in it, then you trust the people who lead it and say, if you save the money, you can strategically repurpose it to expand your impact. That not only encourages saving, it encourages innovation, and it encourages the repurposing of dollars, which means that you expand impact and reduce costs. Now, if you don't believe in the area of business, then you should fund it appropriately to what you believe in it. But if you believe that it should innovate and change and expand its impact, then you should encourage that by allowing it the opportunity to do so. So I think that we have to have a direct conversation. Do we believe that the parliamentary exchanges that we engage on are important, and do we believe that that's an area of business that we should continue? Then if so, I think that when we allocate budgets, if savings are found, that we should trust the organization to repurpose it to expand their impact. I think that we should have an honest conversation, though, because if we take a use it or lose it approach, as we don't in our MOB, we don't in our travel status account, we don't in other places, that the difference is that we're going to encourage the exact opposite of what we're trying to do, and this is a well-demonstrated fact in management. So I very strongly support this. I think there's a lot of areas where the members from all parties have talked about the areas where they'd like to be able to expand impact. So I think the fact that they've used these savings and they're trying to repurpose it strategically it encourages best practice. But I think if we want to do less of it, then let's just have a straight-up conversation about it and either cut the budget entirely or cut it to whatever proportion that you want to.
Any comments on that? No. Mr. Scheer.
I just want to make sure I'm crystal clear on the original allotment. The original allotment, based on what my understanding of the briefing note, was an extra payment. The board allocated funds over and above what the JIC envelope normally receives. Is that correct? Okay. So I think that's an important point, because it's not as if at the end of the year the JIC had extra money left over because of any number of things, from prudent management to events being downscaled or canceled, and then they're going to lose it. This was an over and above the original allotment for a very specific purpose that came in under budget. And I've already made my larger points, and I really do respect my colleagues' desire not to turn this into a partisan issue. But I don't think it's a question of not believing in the work or the validity of some of the outcomes of the JIC and its various associations. It's a matter of prioritizing. And yes, absolutely, I believe the priority right now should be trying to find every cent that we can find of savings. If we can be trusted in small things, we can be trusted in big things. This might not be a lot of money when it comes to the entire budget of the federal government, but it is a very important signal. And if we want to have a discussion on the overall funding envelope of the JIC, I absolutely agree we should perhaps have that. And there are times in the regular financial cycle where that would be appropriate. This, to me, looks like a backdoor enlargement of the JIC funding. And anyway, I'll end my comments there. I don't feel like I need to say anything else. I can't support the recommendation.
Any further comments or questions? So do we have consent? I don't believe we do. We don't. Okay, very good. I'm afraid we're going to have to turn it down of the board. Thank you for your presentations. Appreciate it.
We will now continue with item number 4, interpretation of resources. Our presenters will be Dominique Laporte, Chief Executive Officer, Translation Bureau, Public Services and Procurement Canada, Matthew Ball, Vice President, Service to Parliament and Interpretation, Translation Bureau, Public Services and Procurement Canada,
Committees and Legislative Services Directorate, Scott Lemoine, Principal Clerk, Committees and Legislative Services Directorate, et Stéphane Aubé,
and Stéphane Aubé, Chief Information Officer. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Monsieur Laporte,
Mr. Laporte, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Since we're gathered in Ottawa, I would first like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. I would also like to acknowledge Dagmar, Cecilia, and Claudette, who are interpreting this meeting. I'm joined by Matthew Ball, Vice President of Services to Parliament and Interpretation. I'd also like to highlight the presence in the audience of Martin Montreuil, our first ever Director of Parliamentary Affairs and Interpreter Wellbeing, and Justine Brett, Director of Interpretation and Canada's Chief Interpreter.
To provide an update on the situation with our interpretation services. I know that you remain very concerned about it, and I want to assure you that we are tirelessly working on improvements. As we have made clear in our previous appearance, the issues related to interpretation are of key importance to our department. Since my arrival in January, I have devoted more time to this than any other issue at the Transition Bureau. I'm serious when I say that this is our top priority. If the issues persist, it is simply because there is no miracle solution. I have just returned from a meeting at the European Parliament where interpretation services are facing very similar difficulties. This situation is not unique to Canada, and here, as elsewhere, there is no easy way to fix things. I'm proud of the efforts that the Transition Bureau has made with its partner. Indeed, over the past 6 months, we have made more progress than ever, and today it is my pleasure to give you an overview of our accomplishment. As you know, there are two aspects to the issue of interpretation, which are both discrete and closely linked. First, I will talk about the health and safety, and I will then give an update on capacity. En ce qui concerne la protection des
Regarding the protection of interpreters, I want to first thank you, Mr. Speaker, for standing in the House and giving a reminder on headset usage rules. Awareness is still a key ingredient in decreasing the number of incidents. Meeting attendees must be attentive at all times when they are attending remotely, of course, but also when they're there in person. Indeed, even if in-person meetings offer the best working conditions for interpreters, we recently had feedback situations most likely caused by in-person participants who brought their earpieces too close to their microphone. Audio equipment is very sensitive. It needs to be used carefully. As a result, there continue to be incidents. The good news is that they seem to lead to fewer injuries than before. Nevertheless, each incident is a cause for concern. Of course, as is the case for construction workers or peace officers, where it is impossible to eliminate risks, in a similar way, it's unrealistic to think that we can completely eliminate sound-related incidents for interpreters, but we have to keep on trying to prevent them. On this topic, the House administration informed you about the new sound checks that were carried out in April and May. We call on leaders in audiology and acoustics to review the results and report any hazards to interpreters and recommend any measures we should take. We'll take advantage of the summer recess to carefully study their recommendations along with our stakeholders. In doing so, we're fulfilling the commitment we made toward the labor program following the instructions we were given in February, and we are establishing the environment of continuous improvement that we need to deal with the situation in the long term, not only because we genuinely care about the well-being of our interpreters, but also because by improving their working conditions, we're decreasing the risk of service disruptions. We're making the profession more attractive to future interpreters, and we're ensuring that we have healthy interpreters to meet Parliament's needs.
Rest assured that meeting your interpretation needs is one of our top priorities. We are fully aware of the difficulties you're facing because of our limited capacity. Still, we are making progress. In 2022-23, our interpreters collectively worked 15,000 hours for the House of Commons, surpassing our previous peak of 14,000 hours in 2017-2018. Unfortunately, given a number of factors, such as the needs to expand our teams for the sake of health and safety, or the frequent session extension, this did not lead to an increase in the numbers of sessions we can cover. That is why we indicated in our May 17 letter that our capacity for the fall would remain at around 160 hours of interpretation per sitting weeks, which usually cover House proceedings, 57 committee sessions, and 3 caucus meetings. With regard to remote simultaneous interpretation, we have participated in the pilot project since January 2023, and we will continue to collaborate this fall as the House administration carefully implements the approach unfolds and according to the whip's priorities. Honorable board members, know that we are continuing to do everything we can do to increase our capacity. I have already spoken to you about our collaboration with universities to foster the next generation of interpreters. I myself have met with Concordia University, McGill University, Université du Québec à Trois-Rivières, Université de Montréal to encourage them to create interpretation programs in order to increase the numbers of graduates. We are also seeking the services of a recruitment strategy to help us find more interpreters who are willing to join the Transition Bureau. With regard to our other recruitment path, the accreditation exam, we have decided to hold it twice a year to reach as many candidates as possible. The next exam will take place on June 26. We also hold workshops for candidates to help them become accredited. Alors, malgré tous ces efforts,
Despite all these efforts, it's still impossible for us to predict how much our capacity will increase, even in the short term. We're dealing with a number of uncertainties, including how many people will pass the exam in June, the renewal of our freelance interpreters' open contract, and the implementation of the new collective agreement for our staff interpreters. Among other things, duration of work is a core topic in our current discussions with our interpreters. On one hand, exposure time to virtual sound has greatly decreased, but on the other hand, some interpreters still have entirely legitimate concerns about their health and safety. Fortunately, our weekly planning meetings with the administrations of the House and the Senate make it possible for us to react quickly to fluctuations in our capacity. Once the uncertainty disappears, if the number of interpretation hours that we can provide surpasses the current 160 hours, you can rest assured that this increase will have an immediate impact on the planning of parliamentary sessions and that you'll be quickly informed. In conclusion, honorable members and members of the House administration, thank you for your support in our efforts to protect interpreters and ensure the delivery of quality interpretation services to Parliament. Matthew and I will now be happy to take your questions. Questions and comments, Mr. Julian. Mr. Chair, I am wondering whether we want to hear all three presentations before we start with questions, because there will be many questions. I'm turning to my colleagues here to see if they would agree with that. It seems to me again, because this is a topic of concern, perhaps Mr. MacDonald and Mr. Obi want to give their presentation. Does everyone agree? Yes. Good. We'll continue with Mr. MacDonald. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. For today, we simply wanted to point out that we have provided the next dashboard. And as I previously said, this is the first dashboard since the Speaker's statement at the beginning of March. And there certainly has been an improvement, as we can see. With regard to the number of interruptions, there are fewer. And with regard to the items we have kept our eye on, we've seen an improvement in almost every category. We've also provided you with more information as requested at the last meeting. The other thing to point out is the sound tests, and on that topic, Stéphane will speak to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to confirm that in the context of our program of continuous improvement with the Translation Bureau, we have conducted more audio tests to ensure that the sound meets the ISO standard. And indeed, the committee sound does meet this standard. We've also done sound tests within the labor program. We have done sound tests in work environments, in live work environments. We've focused on two areas. The first test focused on frequencies because we asked us to look at all required frequencies with regard to events were there, and our systems can test these frequencies. The tests were done. All criteria were met. And so all the frequencies were detected, and this is important for the health and safety of interpreters. And however, we also conducted tests with regard to pressure.
With sound pressure tests with the NRC, initial reports were submitted yesterday, and they will be submitted to the audiologists over the next they were submitted yesterday, but we will get reports from them over the next couple of weeks to validate whether there is an health and safety risk as it relates to sound pressures. But I could say that the initial data that we've seen seems to indicate that we are within the ISO norm, and we will let the audiologist states whether it's a risk to the health and safety perspective. And we are continuing to actually work with them on protocols as it relates to exceptions. So that's basically the test that we've been working over the last couple of weeks.
Very good. Are there any further presentations before we go to questions? Okay. Nous allons commencer avec Monsieur.
So we will begin with Mr. Julian.
Madame de Bellefeuille. Mr. Julian.
Ms. Finley and Ms. de Bellefeuille. Mr. Julian. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We greatly appreciate your reports today. The health and safety of House of Commons interpreters is crucial. This committee has made that clear repeatedly. We want to make sure interpreters work in a healthy environment because without interpreters, there is no parliament. I think we all can agree on that. For that reason, I think there will be many questions today. Now, before I begin with questions, I simply wish to point out, or rather to highlight the progress. Now, clearly, we're not at a point of zero tolerance, but when I look at chart number 2 on the dashboard, which refers to April 2023 and May of 2023, there was a 90% approved microphone use and 98% in May. So that is progress. And I think this shows that we have moved forward, but we are still not at the point where there is no guarantee of any accidents happening. So on the whole, that's positive. Now, Mr. Laporte, last year we had received an update with regard to the number of candidates sitting the accreditation exam. And we also received numbers on people who were in training. I do not believe we've received an update in several months. So can you tell us a little more about the year-over-year number of interpreters who have sat the accreditation exam, those who have passed, and those who actually were trained and then hired and have started working? So how many new interpreters started working? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be pleased to respond to that. The last accreditation exam was in November of last year. There were 70 ONS candidates, and the number of Canadian external candidates, those who were not already working for the Bureau, 10 passed. 4 foreign candidates had also passed, and 3 Translation Bureau employees were accredited. So we were very pleased with those results, and we didn't choose offer jobs to all of them because some chose to work as freelancers, but we did add 10 new freelancers to our team. So that is the result for November of last year.
Suivi l'examen.
Oui, exact.
71 sat the exam? Yes. How many passed? 17 passed. And of the 17, 10 were hired as freelancers. Yes, that's right. That's the best information I have. When we look at the security clearance, we were able to hire 10 people. Since then, was another exam held? Well, on June 27th next, we are going to have another exam, and this is the first time there will be 2 accreditation exams in the year. So far, 40 people have shown an interest to sit the exam. Some people might not show up at the last minute, so we can't speculate right now how many people we will be able to recruit following that exam. I don't want to speculate, but we are confident that there will be new recruits who will then decide whether they want to work as freelancers or join us as staff interpreters. Thank you very much. I know that my colleagues also have questions. I will therefore end my questioning and come back later if necessary. Now, we received a letter from the International Association of Conference Interpreters, which raised issues with regard to the situation of freelancers. Now, freelancers who will not offer as much availability, will they be penalized? Or will all freelancers, regardless of their ability, be taken up equally? Thanks again for the question. Now, in terms of freelancers, I want to be clear. There will be no discrimination between freelancers wishing to offer either 4 or 6 hours of work a day. We believe our contract employees need to have the choice, and they will give a different rate depending on how much they work. There's such a shortage that we need every available interpreter. So I want to reassure all freelancers that we will need you here in Parliament. The demand is there, and there will be no discrimination between a freelance interpreter who wishes to provide 4 hours of work a day versus one who will offer 6 hours of work a day. There will be enough work for everyone.
Continue with Ms. Finley. Ms. Finley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of requests and comments as well. Firstly, thank you for you're doing a lot of very good work, so I want to thank you for that. It's difficult. And thank you for providing us with the data showing that at least 70 committee meetings were canceled since September. I'd asked for that, and you provided that, and I thank you. However, I'm asking again, ancillary to that, would you be able to provide us similar data for past years? Because seeing those cancellations in isolation, I have no way to understand if that's an increase or normal. I need data from at least a couple of years back. That would be very helpful. I've also been informed that we have lost 57 hours of committee time since the April break. And that is an awful lot of committee time lost. And the reason given is resources. So I'm concerned about that and concerned about that trend. We are currently debating a proposal to make hybrid parliament a permanent thing, and that may in fact happen. And we all know that a lot of our issues here with resources have to do with hybrid parliament. There's good reasons perhaps to have some hybrid aspects to our parliament, but it does mean we rely ever more heavily on our interpretation resources. So I'm interested to know how you see the impact on those resources should we be in a full hybrid parliament. Also, you made reference, Monsieur Laporte, to 4 or 6 hour shifts. So I am wondering what percentage of interpreters are continuing to work 4 hour shifts. Is there a move to 6 hour shifts? If there is a move to that, how is that being received? And would there be a risk of an offsetting reduction in employee retirements or freelancers' availability, in your opinion? We have to understand the actual environment that we're working in. And my last question is, how often is the minister briefed? I mean, is she regularly instructed? Is she alive to these issues? Because it seems to me, particularly with the move potentially to a full hybrid permanently, that we need to hear from the minister, that this board needs to hear from the minister on these issues. So I've raised several things. I'll let you decide who's answering me.
I guess the first one would go to Mr. McDonald, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to Ms. Finley. We absolutely pleased to see what we have in our system in terms of data from previous years, and we'll provide that to the board.
On va continuer avec Monsieur Laporte.
So I'm going to try to address all your questions. Just let me know if I've skipped some of those. Or in terms of the loss of committee time, this is something that we take very seriously. So we appreciate that this is a deficiency that we need to address. I'm kind of confident that all the measures that we're putting will be adding this capacity. But we know that they've been basically difficult choice that needed to be made. For example, when we had committee extension, it meant that some committee had some time to be canceled or rescheduled. So we appreciate and we're very mindful of that. And this is one of our top priority that we want to fix in terms of the requirement of the House. Your next question was dealing with should we be in an hybrid parliament? the Translation Bureau provide services to its clients, so it's not necessarily for me or for the Bureau, basically, to provide my view on that. We provide the service in the way they are requested by Parliament, and since the pandemic, we've been provided that on a hybrid basis. So we'll continue to provide the services on the basis that Parliament decide. Your next question was dealing with 6-hour shift and 4-hour shift. So since the start of the pandemic, our interpreters have been working 4-hour shift. So we never went back to 6-hour shift. So we never went back to full on-site presence. Is there a risk of offsetting reduction? We do have people who are set to retire after a career in the public service. So right now, I think we anticipate that up to 7 interpreters may decide to make that decision this year. So of course, part of the new resources would offset those departures. We are, nevertheless, I would say, cautiously optimistic that with all the measures that are being taken, we should be able to have a net increase in resources. But there's, again, a lot of unknown associated with that. And it's only when we're going to be getting the results, say, for example, of our June exam, that we're going to be able to get a true sense of how many additional resources we can add to our pool of interpreters. You did touch also on our minister being briefed. I have to say that she's very well aware of the interpreter situation. I did have the opportunity to brief the minister myself. She's briefed on a regular basis by our deputy minister. She's paying a lot of interest to that file. As a doctor herself, it's something that is of very much importance. So those issues, those challenges, also the measure that we are taking to improve the situation are being brought to our attention on a weekly basis.
Continue.
As a follow-up, just on this 4 to 6 hour shifts, is there a barrier to returning to at least some people doing 6-hour shifts? You're saying you haven't really entertained that, but is that not one area where if someone is available or willing to do 6-hour shifts where we could add to our resource pool that way? Through the chair.
Thank you. This is something that we're going to be exploring with the next open contract. So this is why we want to give the choice to freelancers to bid on 4-hour days or 6 hours. So we'll see what we're going to get. Are we going to get people who are interested in 6 hours? It depends. And I know that we're talking about the Geologist report, the NRC reports. So the House Administration has been working tirelessly with us on that. So we need also to make sure that our interpreters are aware of the results. So we don't want to rush things. The last thing I want to do is impose 6 hours without having proper discussion, without basically being able to talk to our interpreters and also let them know of all the measures that have been taken to make sure that if they were to go back to 6 hours, that it is safe to do that. So this is why we anticipate that a lot of discussion. We want to involve also the key player, AIC, and our union to make sure that they are involved in those discussions. So the approach is slightly different between our staff employees and between the freelancer.
Just a final comment. We are very concerned that with full hybrid parliament, we're just not going to have the resources to do our work. And so much of our work is done at the committee level by members of parliament, and it's very important work to move legislation through and to do the studies we're tasked with doing. And we know that with the loss of 57 hours just in this last short while since April, that we're not even talking about other parliamentary associations where there should be simultaneous translation and other venues where we need these resources. I personally am of the view that all committee chairs should be in person and that all witnesses should be encouraged to be in person. Certainly ministers or senior administrators should be in person. All of this will make it a little easier on resources, and we're all concerned about the health and welfare of our interpreters. It's a difficult job to do. Those who do it extremely well. Thank you. But it is of concern that this is going to increase pressure on your work to staff us and their work to do what they do. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any comments on that? No? Okay, very good. On va continuer avec Madame.
We'll continue with Madame de Bellefeuille. Madame de Bellefeuille. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin, I want to thank somebody exceptional. Since I've been elected, she's my voice. Anglophones hear my voice through Dagmar Ratchen, who's celebrating her 30 years as an interpreter and who's leaving us next week. She's retiring. Dagmar is my voice, so if Anglophones around the table hear an interpreter and my accurate words, it's her last meeting of this, so you won't have Dagmar's voice anymore. So I wanted to thank her and congratulate her for her 30 years of service. Now, to continue, I have a few questions, one after the other, if you'll allow me, Mr. Chairman. Could Mr. MacDonald indicate how many committees have been cancelled? In the current Parliament, in the document, I'd like people listening to us to understand how many were cancelled because of lack of capacity in the virtual dashboard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the question, Madame de Bellefeuille. We looked at our system. We don't have a system that keeps all this information, but we did look at meetings that were canceled, where a notice was published. So we know that it's close, but probably not exactly accurate. And we made this list for today's meeting. It was 70 minimum that were canceled because of a lack of interpretation capacity, either because the hours of Parliament were extended. We know that when the Treasury Board and the administration have discussions, they have choices to make because they have to give priority to the House of Commons, and parliamentary committees suffer because of this lack of capacity most of the time. I could add, Mr. Chairman, that yes, there are committees, but there's also informal meetings that happen on the Hill, usually only in English because there are no interpreters. All the association meetings, parliamentary associations, there are a lot of activities on Parliament Hill where unilingual francophones or unilingual anglophones do not have access in both official languages because there aren't enough interpreters. So we're talking about 70 committees. I think the Translation Bureau said it had 160 hours capacity. So 160 hours a week was not sufficient to meet the minimum needs. We can put it that way. The House of Commons and parliamentary committees, that's the minimum to be covered, and that wasn't sufficient. So, okay. I looked at your virtual dashboard because I think it's important to measure our progress. And yes, we can see that there was an improvement. I'll give you what I took away from this virtual dashboard. I understood that we'd seen an improvement, but since January, the number of minutes of physical presence has stagnated. We have not gone beyond that ceiling in order to guarantee a larger number of people present at our committee. And the House of Commons, there's no concern about that, but did I understand correctly that we've reached a plateau here? I think we could say that, yes. According to the statistics in the report, in the virtual dashboard, since January, it's been quite consistent. 82% of witnesses or participants in meetings have been there in person, and 18% are there virtually. Okay. Did I understand this correctly? Because I've heard this in debates on the motion about a permanent hybrid parliament. With those statistics that can be misleading or interpreted incorrectly, essentially, we've achieved a rate similar to before the pandemic. We used to have video conferences. When we look at this, Mr. McDonald, one could interpret these data that way, but I think that you worked very hard to put forward a dashboard that was attractive to me, because when we compare, we shouldn't be comparing apples and oranges. It should be apples and apples. And I thank you for these tables. I know this was a lot of work, but you compared minutes before the pandemic, where people were there in physical present, and the minutes since the virtual parliament. There are 3 times more minutes being done virtually right now than before the pandemic. So when I heard that our rates were now comparable, despite the figures you just cited, if you compare the number of minutes, a lot more time is spent virtually than physically present. Did I understand your dashboard properly? Yes, I think the main reason for that is that we have more meetings with video conferences now, or a component with people participating remotely. In the past, we had limits on the number of video conferences we could offer and the number of witnesses per meeting. Now we have fewer restrictions because it's possible to participate virtually. Okay, so in the olden days, if I can put it that way, before the pandemic, no parliamentarian had access to the hybrid formula. It was only guests or witnesses that used video conferences. That excluded all parliamentarians, ministers, and people who work here. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I know this is a lot of work, but even if the motion that will now regulate Parliament is passed today, and tomorrow morning we end up with a permanent hybrid Parliament, I think it's important for the Bureau to continue to collect data in order to better understand and follow track what's going to go on, to encourage the administration to take action that will reduce the impact of the lack of capacity of the Translation Bureau, and see what we can do through our political leadership, the action we can take, each one of us in our parties, to facilitate the work of interpreters, but especially to protect their health and safety. So if you agree, even if hybrid parliament becomes permanent without any doubt tomorrow morning, I propose that we continue this work for at least a year to follow the evolution of the situation and continue to document this issue. Before you ask my colleague's opinion, I have 2 or 3 questions for Mr. Laporte, if you allow me. So, Mr. Laporte, in your remarks, and I thank you for having sent them a little in advance, cutting it a little fine, but at least I had an opportunity to read it before your presentation. Why is it that now you are going to call on a recruitment agency? I don't understand how this strategy will improve things. Spending money to hire a recruitment agency, how can they do anything more than you're doing right now? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, look, it's a good question. I think there are many interpreters that work for international organizations. They may be in Europe. They may not have the Translation Bureau on their radar as an employer. They may like to do freelance work for the Translation Bureau. We're not going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking about a small contract. But if we can get maybe a dozen people who might be interested in joining the Bureau, that would be a good return on the investment, an excellent return. We have many international bodies with whom we're in contact, other organizations that we may not be familiar with. A recruitment firm could assure us that we've covered all possibilities. Well, Mr. Chairman, given the current reputation of interpreters' working conditions, we hear that it's not all that attractive to come to work on Parliament Hill because of the hybrid mode that can lead to hearing injuries. I think that last month you had 4 injuries, and one interpreter had to be absent for at least 6 weeks, so that was a significant injury leading to long-term absence. Are you worried of the international repercussion of the fact that we don't have a very good reputation on this front to offer interpreters good working conditions? Mr. Chairman, first of all, in terms of injuries, it's important to understand that many of these injuries took place with in-person meetings. We're not talking necessarily about virtual meetings. Unfortunately, we had these Larsen effect injuries. We had interpreters impacted by that. The consequences are very grave, whether it's present or virtual. Security measures have to be put in place. The Bureau's reputation, that was difficult. I must admit, since the pandemic, it wasn't easy at all. But I'm consoled by the fact that we have a great deal of improvement. We've seen all the work done with our colleagues in administration here, audiologists, the National Research Council of Canada. I'm very confident that when we can reassure interpreters that all tests have been done with consoles, that the place is safe, that yes, people will knock on our door, because the government offers very good conditions, and the Translation Bureau remains an employer of choice, in my opinion. We have 40 people who have registered for our next accreditation exam, so despite the shortage, there is interest in offering services to the Translation Bureau. Okay, so I won't get into a debate on figures because we played that movie last year. We don't have a clear picture because in human resource management, some come, some go, some are injured. I've given up on getting the exact number of employees because we don't really get the right figure. But what I know is some are going to retire. And often these departures, when you recruit, the recruitment does not make up for the absence of those who leave. And my question is this. You said one of your strategies is to double the number of accreditation exams. Well, why did you delay doubling this? Why don't you triple it or quadruple the number of accreditation exams in order to get a much larger number of people coming in compared to those leaving? What prevents you from doing this? It seems to me a magic solution to have doubled the number of exams. You could have done this 2 years ago, for instance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, we cannot create new interpreters. There's only 2 universities offering the Masters of Conference Interpretation, University of Ottawa and York University, Glendon College. So we're limited in the number of graduates. The Translation Bureau hires all graduates from these programs if they pass. When I came here, I heard there are graduates that are going to finish their studies in April. We could give them an opportunity to pass the exam in June. I don't want to speculate why this wasn't done in the past. We'll also see, is this going to be a magic recipe? We may have fewer people who apply for the next exam in November, but it's a solution I wanted to explore and see how many candidates we could get with an exam in June. It also makes us more present, more visible. I don't think we can increase the number because these are interpreters. We want these accredited people to be good. We don't want to compromise on quality. There are interpreters who correct this. This can't be done in 5 minutes. It requires a lot of hours of time, of preparation and correction. So that's why we're going to limit it to twice a year. Okay, in summary, Mr. Chairman, what I understand here is that the hybrid parliament as we experience right now could have been different, but as long as we see it as a Friday morning, it consumes a lot of hours in interpretation. In the olden days, we didn't have committees on Monday mornings. We didn't have committees at all on Friday. So we were concentrated on a few days of the week in working committees, parliamentary committees. But now you're telling me it's difficult to recruit. It's difficult. We need our own resources to correct these exams. So it's the chicken or the egg. The evidence to me is that in September, it's not reassuring. I'm unilingual. I'm a unilingual francophone. It's far from reassuring. When I see what's going on, I'm not at all reassured about September, because if your resources don't increase, if the capacity of the Translation Bureau doesn't increase by September, together we're going to decide that it's okay for parliamentary activities not to take place. It's okay for parliamentary committees not to take place. We accept that fact because there's a lack of capacity by your bureau to train, recruit, accredit the number of interpreters we need to do our jobs. And that's what's impressive to me. No matter what you do, and no matter what the administration does, we come up with the same situation. You're telling us through letters and through your testimony, there will not be more than 160 hours, 57 events. So as soon as the government increases the number of hours in Parliament, we have to cut the number of hours in committee. And I'll tell you very sincerely, Mr. Laporte, Mr. McDonald, I find that unacceptable on the one hand. So what's left as a solution, Mr. McDonald? That is to increase the number of hours where people are physically present. So despite the rule that will be adopted today under GAG, every party is at stake here. We'll have to discipline our members and urge them to be present in person and stimulate your team so that witnesses come in person, because the objective of all this will be to limit injuries to interpreters, because despite the fact that Mr. Obey said we conducted studies with audiologists and experts, we know that the House administration is making an effort, and the Translation Bureau too. But the fact is that interpreters are being injured, regardless of the reason, regardless of the place. There are just fewer of them to serve parliamentarians. Your volume is not sufficient, and I'm worried. And despite this, which has been documented for 2 years now, we see that in September we're going to hit a wall. And Mr. Laporte, I hope that the AIC Interpreters Association prediction is not true. They anticipate that there are interpreters who will not apply for your new contract and choose between 4 and 6 hours because they want to protect their hearing. And in human resource management, to keep your people, you have to apply a precautionary principle. And that principle in this case is to preserve our resources that are interpreters for members so that members have access to both languages. We need numerous healthy interpreters to do that.
Beaucoup de parlementaires. La question de la capacité.
That much. It doesn't interest. The health and safety of interpreters doesn't really interest parliamentarians. That's the feeling I have. Sometimes when I'm speaking, there are members of parliament or other people who don't put their earpiece on. I'm speaking French. 80% of what's happening here is in English. So I need interpretation. And when I'm speaking, I find what I have to say is interesting. I don't know if the Liberal whip agrees. I have much to share. And it would be nice to see people put their earpiece on to listen to what I'm saying, but that's not always the case. So I really hope that in September, that by September, a miracle happens in June so we can have more interpreters, we can increase capacity, and that my colleagues around the table who are so passionate about this topic can rally their troops. So we work as little as possible in a remote capacity so that we can increase interpretation capacity. Thank you very much. I just have an observation. First, I think the matter of self-discipline is very important. Even though I understand and I've engaged in filibusters myself, I know it's a tool that's used quite a bit in committee. I know that there have been many committees subject to a filibuster. We haven't talked about that issue, but they have a real impact, of course. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, but the reality is that it is the right of a member of parliament to engage in a filibuster. But that reality collides with the lack of interpretation capacity. And if we want to preserve and build an environment in which interpreters feel safe with regard to their health and safety while working, well, there's no doubt that filibusters have had a huge impact. As we know, Mr. Chair, some committees were hijacked by filibusters for weeks on end. So if members of parliament started disciplining themselves a little more, perhaps no committee would ever be cancelled. So again, that's something that is in our hands as members of parliament. I'm nevertheless concerned with the number of interpreters and their working conditions. And Mr. Laporte, when you are in discussions with the union and with the International Association of Interpreters, that when you offer a 6 or 4 hour contract, I really hope that the freelancers will be able to choose the number of hours they wish to work. I think they should be able to do this in the interest of their health and safety, and I think that all members here in this committee feel strongly about that. So we hope you do not force the freelancers to make a choice. We want to make sure that everybody can work. We don't want to lose interpreters, and we want to increase capacity. Second, I feel more must be done to recruit more interpreters. The fact that we've gone from 71, you talked about 40 candidates for the next exam. So we've gone from 71 to 40 candidates. If you look back to 2022, a quarter of interpreters passed the exam. So now 40 will sit the exam, maybe 40 will pass if the same ratio applies. So we need to attract more people to sit the exam, and perhaps we need to find different ways of attracting them. So that's important. The last thing I would like to say is an issue which Mr. Aubé can perhaps address. It's about the Larson effect. Are there new technologies which we can use to prevent these Larson effects from happening? Are there systems out there which can cut off any potential Larson effect, any sound spike? So I'm putting the question to Mr. Aubé. Is the administration actively looking for other types of technology which would prevent any sudden, unexpected sound spikes? Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the question, Mr. Julian. I can tell you that the current system is one which immediately or almost immediately shuts down a Larson system. We'll be tabling reports in the next few weeks, and you'll see that the reaction time of our systems to protect interpreters meets the standard, even exceeds it. However, our work is not done. If you ask me, Stéphane, is there anything else? The answer is no, but we're always looking, we're always assessing not just systems to address the Larson effect, but we're looking at everything that might help interpreters so they can keep on doing their job. So we're looking at different solutions to help them, to protect them, and we will be coming up with other things between now and the fall. Do we have anything to completely stop Larson effects? The answer is no, but we will keep on working on that, not only on the systems, but we're also going to keep on working on awareness. Because right now, when you look at incidents that recently happened, it's people who perhaps were putting their earpieces too close to the mic, and even though each mic has captions telling users not to do that, but again, all this to say that we will be working on raising awareness, because when there is an incident, 3/4 of the time, it has to do with behaviors, so we'll be focusing on that as well. Thank you.
I do think there is an education piece for all members of Parliament. For instance, in our most recent caucus, we were told it would be very helpful if we lowered the microphones when we have active question and answer periods, because the mic too close to the speaker causes problems, and it seemed to help a lot, but we just didn't know that was a thing before, and that's something we could do to help. So continuing education, either through just communications or letting the whips and House leaders know what we can say to our respective caucuses, help. My friend, the House leader of the NDP, raised filibustering. Filibustering is something that all parties engage in at committees. It is a function of Parliament. It is a tool of parliamentarians that is used. I doubt that filibustering is going to end. We have the other issue of sitting till midnight every night, and that requires both the government's initiation and a member from another party, House leader, agreeing to those. That cuts into committee time. We have lots of reasons committee time is cut into, but this is a very fluid place, and anything that is within the purview of parliamentarians and doing their work, or the government getting through its legislation, these are parts of our rules, and we have to cope with that. And I think we all do understand that, and we understand the strain our interpreters are under, but of course it is our main purpose here, and I might mention to Madame Del Belfoy that I had my earpiece on the whole time you were talking, as I usually do, that we need to respect this workplace and all that we need to do. We need to respect those who support us, and but we are just not sufficiently supported, let's face it, in the work we have to do here. With the hybrid functioning the way it is, and particularly if we move to it being a full-on hybrid, we are going to continue to be seized of this issue, as we have been since I've been on this board, at every meeting, because we're straining between workplace injury, which we all want to avoid, and the necessities of interpretation in a bilingual country and in a bilingual parliament. So I just think we have to do everything we can collectively to support further recruitment, more recruitment, and a good workplace environment for those doing this important work. Thank you.
Good. Any further questions or comments? If I could, I'd like to ask a couple of questions myself. I believe my first question is for Mr. MacDonald. We're supplying 160 hours a week of translation. There's 70 meetings that are not being covered a year. How many hours a week would we need to, say, cover everything we need?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
It's a very difficult question to answer because there are some variations in terms of the number of hours of meetings that are required per week. I would just perhaps also add, and it's been covered several times already in the meeting today, is that there are other activities that are taking place that are outside of committees, as you know well, that are not being supported by interpretation as well. So even beyond just the allotment that committees requires, and it is falling short today, there would be other hours of interpretation that would be required to support many other activities. So it's very difficult. There's a lot of variation from even from one week to another. But if we look back at it historically, members are accustomed to being able, committees are accustomed to being able to meet when they need to, without any interruptions, and that's what's been missing, I think, since the start of the pandemic.
Let me rephrase that question then. In an ideal world, where we cover committees, how many would we need, and other ancillary meetings, how many would we need? Two numbers is what I'm looking for, so that I want a clear vision of where we have to be compared to where we are.
I don't have specific numbers for you today. What we know is that there is certainly an ebb and flow to when committees get busier. For example, May, June, November, December, the number of cancellations goes up, and so what might be 57 may be a number that is closer to the mark, probably a little bit low, but closer to the mark. 57 committee events, that is. At some times of the year, when it gets busier, it's clearly not sufficient based on just on the number of cancellations of some committees in order to allow other committees to keep meeting, sort of thing. In the past, that wasn't always the case. So.
Just to give me an idea of how much, and I understand it's very difficult, but if maybe you can come up with an ideal situation, and then once I have that question, then I could go to Mr. Laporte and ask him how many people we'd actually need to fill those hours. So I'll leave it at that, and I won't ask for anything more. Mr. Holland, I believe, has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you to everyone. I think there's been a great improvement in this area, and it's important to us all. I'm just wondering if maybe we should create a subcommittee of the BOIE committee. We seem to be spending about an hour every meeting over the last 2 or 3 months. And it's starting to be difficult to get other matters. Perhaps, we'd be considering a subcommittee of BOIE that could report back to BOIE, because it just, as I certainly agree, this is incredibly important. But an hour every meeting now for many months is it's making it difficult to get other work. And perhaps there's another way to be able to do these deep dives in a way that allows BOIE to do the rest of its work as well.
Do we have consensus for that? No, we don't have consensus for that, so we'll move on. I want to thank you all for coming out today. Merci d'être venu aujourd'hui. Maintenant, nous allons continuer. I'm going to ask for a bit of a change in the schedule. We have Mr. McDonald, who's already up here, and he's going to be speaking to number 6. Est-ce qu'on peut prendre numéro 6?
Can we go to number 6? It should not take much time. And once we've dealt with that, we can come back to number 5. Do we all agree to that? Great. I have something here to read.
Is the annual report at tab 6. You have before you a letter from the chair of the Liaison Committee, Ms. Gros, who wishes to inform the board that the Liaison Committee recently adopted and presented to the House its latest annual report on committee activities and expenditures for the 2022-2023 fiscal year. Ms. Gros submitted a copy of the report to the board and has indicated that she would be available to meet with us at a future date if the board desires. Pursuant to Standing Order 1214 of the Board of Internal Economy, shall cause to be tabled in the House an annual comprehensive financial report outlining the individual expenditures of each committee. The established practice since 2014 has been for the Liaison Committee's annual report to be approved by the Board and tabled by the Speaker in order to comply with the requirements of the Standing Order. Consequently, If all members are in agreement, I will submit the report as attached to the House as the board's report pursuant to standing order, to the standing order. Are there any questions or comments about the report or the process? Agreed. Does everyone agree without I submit the report to the House? I see that everyone does. Thank you, colleagues. That was quick and out of the way. Now we can go on to number 5. It's a report to Canadians, and we have Mr. Jans, acting clerk for the House of Commons.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Given the time, I'll reduce my notes. Thank you for the opportunity to present the House of Commons report to Canadians 2023. As you may already know, this report allows Canadians to learn more about members of Parliament's work and functions and keeps them also informed about projects that were completed by the House administration over the past year. We were proud to include in this report the fact that, after a long hiatus due to the pandemic, the House of Commons resumed some of its activities, reopened its doors to visitors, and once again allowed the public to attend House of Commons debates and committee meetings. En plus d'offrir des services aux députés.
In addition to providing services to Member of Parliament, the House administration has worked hard to make Parliament more accessible to a wider audience. 2 online resources have been launched for those unable to participate in guided tours. The first, a web page entitled History, Art and Architecture, and the second is a portal entitled Info Procedure.
Of the House's work to better understand accessibility issues and information about its plan for ensuring a barrier-free environment for all. This work is in line with the House administration's commitment to promoting an inclusive, diverse, and engaged workforce. C'est également dans un souci d'inclusion.
It's also in the spirit of inclusiveness that we recommend that the title of this report be changed from Report to Canadians to Report to Canadians. Inclusive writing in both official languages is a topic we're hearing more and more about, and it's part of a much broader accessibility issue.
The report will be tabled in both official languages in the House and made available on ourcommons.ca in a printable, mobile-friendly, and accessible HTML format. It will also be shared through our social media channels and with our parliamentary partners and legislative counterparts. Tweets highlighting various elements of the report will be posted throughout the year. Members of Parliament, of course, are welcome to use our social media posts to share and discuss the report to Canadians with their constituents. I'm available to answer any questions. Merci beaucoup.
Questions and comments? We have Ms. Finley. Ms. Finley.
Chair, I was curious, do you have any stats on web readership of last year's edition of this report? What kind of take-up are we getting?
Maybe not viral.
It doesn't have to do that, but
no,
I mean,
but
I'm curious.
It is well used, I would say. Last year's report, between the English version and the French version, got about 3,000 hits.
And I recognize you don't rely on any external resources to prepare the document, but it is quite comprehensive. So could you give us a sense of how many employees, internal resources, are tasked with contributing to producing this report?
That's a very good question, Ms. Finley. Indeed, a lot of people are involved with the assembling of the information for the report, and then, of course, the formatting and that. It's all done in-house. There's nothing that's done outside. It's not published, so there's no cost related to that. But in terms of the number of people involved, we'd have to go back and come back to the board with that number.
Other questions? Autres questions? Okay, agreed. Very good. Maintenant, nous allons continuer avec.
Now we're going to go on to number 6, annual report on committee, or rather number 7, annual financial report and request for approved budget carry it forward to fiscal 2023-24.
Chief Financial Officer, Jose Fernandez, Deputy Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Lafontaine, Senior Director, Decision Support and Financial Planning, and Andrew Newman, Audit Partner of the Office Manager, Ottawa KPMG, as well as Jonathan Généreux, Audit Manager, KPMG. Monsieur Saint-Georges, vous laisse la parole.
Mr. Saint-Georges, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, I'm presenting the Annual Financial Report 2022-23 of the House of Commons, which includes audited financial statements. Moreover, I'm asking the board to authorize the operating budget report. In sections 1 to 3 of the report, we see the financial results of the House for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023. Section 4 presents audited financial statements for the same period. Every year, financial statements are audited by an independent external auditor, KPMG in this case. I'm pleased to say that the audit led to unreserved opinion. We noted an overall increase in spending of $33 million in 22-23 compared to the previous fiscal year. This increase is due primarily to 3 items. The first is $17.3 million. That's more than half the increase for the increase in travel expenditures following the removal of public health restrictions. The second item corresponds to $5.9 million, mainly for the life cycle of members' computer equipment, the vision and long-term plan, as well as licenses and IT projects to support members. The third item is $5.3 million for the increase in salary costs and cost of living increases under the members and senior officers program.
The year-end financial results. The 22-23 budget amounted to $558.5 million. Total net operating expenses were $537.6 million. And this left a surplus of $20.9 million. 51% of the surplus pertains to the House office budgets of members and House officers, which reflects typical spending trends. 13% relates to budgets of committees, associations, and exchanges, mainly due to lower travel costs and witness expenses than before the pandemic. Finally, 36% pertains to the House administration, mainly attributable to job vacancies and recruitment challenges. The 20.9 surplus represents 5.3% of the 22-23 budget. It also corresponds to the lapse that will be reported in the public accounts of Canada. Annually, with the board's approval, the House carries forward lapse amounts of up to 5%, which corresponds to $19.8 million for 22-23. Of that, $7.5 million would be allocated to the office budgets of members and House officers, and the $12.3 million remaining would be allocated to House administration to support various member-related projects and initiatives. The administration is therefore seeking the board's approval to include a budget carry forward of $19.8 million to fund mainly member-related projects and initiatives such as member security, the accessibility plan, life cycling of IT, members orientation, and other various initiatives. This $19.8 million carry forward would be included in the 2023-24 supplementary estimates that will be tabled in the fall. Mr. Speaker, this concludes my presentation, and I'll now pass the floor to Mr. Newman, KPMG audit partner, and then the board will then have the opportunity to ask questions and speak to the auditors in camera.
Questions or comments on that? Okay. Oh, Ms. Finley, yes.
I do have some questions, but I'm thinking maybe we should hear from everyone first.
Well, what we're going to do is once we're done with this, we're going to move in camera, and it'll allow us to be more open. If the members want to keep the questions for then it could be they can ask them, or would you like to ask your questions?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do them on a public first. Oh, I'm sorry. So if we have the other public ones, maybe we'll go ahead. Mr. Newman, I apologize. Thank you, Mrs. Finley. I'm glad you brought that up. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present our audit opinion on the 2023 financial statements and provide a brief summary of the conduct of our audit. I would like to introduce my colleague, Jonathan Genero, Audit Manager for the audit, as well as in the audience, Ines Grubasek, Senior Accountant. The Chief Financial Officer has presented the 2023 financial statements, which House Administration has prepared using public sector accounting standards. Public sector accounting standards are used by all governments in Canada and are issued by the Public Sector Accounting Board, upon which I served as member and vice chair for 12 years ending in 2020. Our role, as your independent auditors, is to obtain reasonable assurance about whether these financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement. The 2023 financial statement audit began with the development of our audit plan, which was based on multiple discussions with House Administration. Our year-end audit was executed in accordance with that plan. During our audit, we received full participation from your House Administration. All of our questions were answered, all of the required supporting documentation was provided, and all issues were satisfactorily resolved. We have completed our audit and issued our audit opinion on June 6th, 2023, in our independent auditor's report. That opinion states that the financial statements present fairly, in all material respects, the financial position of the House of Commons as at March 31st, 2023, and its results of operations, its accumulated surplus, and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards. June 6th, 2023 is the earliest date of issuance of the financial statements of the House of Commons in its history. I want to commend House Administration for implementing the financial reporting processes required to achieve this date. I also thank the Board for scheduling this presentation prior to the summer recess during what is a very busy legislative agenda. And that, Mr. Speaker, concludes my report.
Very good. Now I'll ask for questions. Any questions or comments? Ms. Finley.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I understand, Mr. St. George, you were saying, I see that MPs lapsed $23.35 million in their office budgets. They'll have access to only $7.5 million of that. And am I correct that you're saying that that carryover of approximately $19.8 million you want to put towards, I think you said, security, accessibility, etc.? Am I talking about the same overage there? Is that correct?
Absolutely, that is correct. So it's broken up into two portions based on our mass. There is a calculation. The carry forward for the administrative component goes back into all those projects that are essentially member related, such as those that I mentioned in my speech. That is correct.
And through you, Mr. Chair, has there been an uptake in use or need for funding of security, more security? Because I think we have been making a push to make sure that constituency offices, in particular, come up to a certain standard on security.
We've seen a considerable increase in the investment in security since 2021. That is correct.
Thank you. And I know I'm relatively new here, but I note in Note 7, page 39, accounts receivable, allowance for doubtful accounts on external receivables. It's quite sizable, $1.65 million, and that seems up from $39,000 the year prior. Can you explain what that relates to?
That allowance was set up last year in 2021-22, and it relates to, actually, just a second, I have to confer a little bit. It was a past decision of the board, essentially, to set up that allowance on our books, and it remains on our books until such time we deem it uncollectible.
What is it about?
I can't reveal the details in the room here.
All right. Okay. Thank you. And on page 17...
I believe that's something we can cover once we get in camera.
Yeah, I understood that. Thank you. Page 17 of the financial report outlines the costs associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. I note there was actually a very small decline year over year, despite, I hope, really turning the corner on the pandemic. It seems it's chalked up to hybrid parliament costs. So my question is, how much of the $2.6 million listed there are extra costs driven by hybrid parliament?
Based on our calculations, approximately 2.3 of the 2.6 is hybrid related that are incremental that we expect will remain a part of our costs until such time where hybrid is no longer an event.
I have one last question. Mr. Chair, I understand, and perhaps Mr. Newman may be the one to answer this, but I understand the materiality threshold increased sharply from $5 million to $9 million. So I'm wondering what that jump is about. And am I correct that materiality means if you see any issues or irregularities which are below that threshold, they're basically not worth commenting on? Am I correct in materiality definition? And if that is the case, is there anything spotted during the audit which would have met that $5 million materiality threshold but not the new $9 million threshold?
Thank you to you, Mr. Chair. I'll do them in reverse, Honourable Member. So in our report, it also says we did not identify any uncorrected misstatements or misstatements that were required to be corrected during our audit. What that means is that the books and records that provided to us by your House administration were not changed because of or by the results of our audit. So the short answer is no, there's nothing over 5 or 9 million that would come to your attention. What materiality is, and I don't want to give an accounting and auditing lesson here, but materiality is basically through the eyes of the user or the reader of the financial statements. And it is an estimate of the, because financial statements are not audited to perfection or they prepared to perfection, but it is an estimate of the amount of differential that would change the user's perspective based on the results of those financial statements on accountability, right? So would it be, the House expenses, as Mr. St. George talked about, was $566 million of total operating. Would it fundamentally change a user's decision if it was $9 million higher, $9 million lower? That does impact our audit work slightly around statistical sampling, but not to a great effect for the House. And I hope I got all 3 of the questions there.
Thank you. Very clear. Thank you.
So what we'll do right now is we're going to suspend for a few minutes and go into in camera. And, Mr. Newman, you have something?
You may want to keep Mr. St. George because I think the question that's coming is more appropriate for him than
very good. I believe he's one of the ones staying in. Very good. Okay, so we're going to suspend right now, and hopefully in a few minutes we'll take this up again.
Thank you.